On June 23rd, British voters voted in favor of a British exit from the European Union. This vote, also known as Brexit, set off a wide discussion and disagreement throughout the socialist movement, and on August 6th, the Peace and Freedom Party in the San Francisco Bay Area held a debate on the issue. Oaklandsocialist, as represented by John Ryman, was one of the panelists, and here is our presentation.
I'm also an expelled member of the Department of Students, expelled for having led a wildcat strike. Sisters and brothers, comrades, this question is not just an abstract question. In the first place, the Brexit vote gave a boost to all the right-wing forces throughout Europe, not just in Great Britain, but throughout the EU, all the right-wing anti-immigrant forces. It also gave a boost to the xenophobes and within Britain and within Western Europe, and it also gave a boost to the right wing and the Blairites within the British Labour Party, as I will show. This question is also an excellent test for socialists. Can we distinguish our theoretical abstractions and all the nice phrases about imperialism and all that sort of thing? How can we apply that to the concrete reality, to the 500-pound gorilla that's sitting in the room? And we should start by looking at the history of the European Union. And it is totally mistaken at best to pretend that the EU is just the same as all the trade deals, NAFTA, and so on. The EU was started by the major capitalist powers in Western Europe, actually during a period of concessions being granted to the working class after World War II. It was started as an attempt to resolve the irresolvable contradiction, the inherent contradiction of capitalism, of the existence of the nation states in the era of world production and of world capitalism, in order to try to prevent Europe from being ripped apart like it had been in the previous decades of World War I and World War II. That was the basis for the start of the European Union, which at that time actually, written into the statutes, they were forced to grant concessions to the working class as far as workers' rights and so on. And there's one little tiny detail that the comrades that compare, that equate the European Union to NAFTA, TPP, and so on, they seem to forget. Just a little minor detail, of course, that whereas all these trade deals are based on the free movement of capital, of course the European Union has that, but there's also this little minor thing that we don't bother talking about, the free movement of labor. That is a huge thing. That all of them, they just throw their principles as far as workers' rights and international right out the door on this question. And we should also look at the general situation. And it's a mistake to simply compare, turn to the right, to simply equate it with xenophobia, fascism, and so on. No, of course it's not.
Right.
But while there have been revolts of the working class against austerity, such as what you saw in Greece, the major trend has been the dissolution and the weakening of working class organizations, the weakening of the traditions of class struggle within the working class. You see that everywhere, and that it does include, of course, the rise of fascism, for instance, the fascist Islamic State, the fascist movements within Israel, and so on. But it's not all just the same, and it's a mistake to pretend that it is. And it's also a mistake just because something disrupts capitalism, such as the rise of the Islamic State, that does not mean that it strengthens the working class. And we have to understand that. Now, so the question is, which was Brexit? And no, not the workers that voted in favor of Brexit. No, they weren't all fascists. But I watched very closely all the interviews and read the accounts of all the interviews with workers, overwhelmingly white, and I'll get to that on the statistics in a minute, who spoke in favor of Brexit. And every single last one that I saw said, we have to do something about immigration. And they also, every single last one said, well, we're tired of taking orders from the European Union. So instead, what are they doing instead? We heard from the comrades about the austerity imposed by the European Union, well, they seem to forget a little minor detail. Every single capitalist government in the world is imposing austerity. So what the Brexit vote was about, in practice, was rejecting austerity from the European Union in favor of getting it from the Tories. There's a reason that this worker down here had that thing, fight the real enemy, Tory austerity. It also was all about the idea that, at very best, that we, the British working class, can fight capital and fight the attacks against us on a national basis. And also, you can deny it all you like, but the fact of the matter is that another inherent premise of the Brexit was the unity of interest between the British capitalists and the British working class. Now, the comrades have talked about the whole issue with Greece. And again, there's a little minor difference that they seem to forget, and that is, in the case of Greece, there's a huge mass battle carried on for years by the Greek working class against austerity. And if they had gotten expelled, of course, Syriza didn't really encourage that battle, nor did it neither mobilize the Greek working class, nor did it seek to mobilize the rest of the European working class. But in any case, if Greece had been expelled from the European Union on the basis of a battle against austerity, that is a totally different thing from simply picking up your marbles and walking away, from leaving the European Union, not just instead of, but in place of having that battle. That is what the Brexit vote was all about. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the working class vote against versus the capitalist vote and so on. Well, the reality is that a far higher percentage of Tories, I've seen these studies, a far higher percentage of Tories voted for Brexit than Labour voters. And let's look at some more statistics. 73% of those under 24 voted against Brexit. 62% of those between 25 and 34 voted against it. Let's look at some more. While 53% of whites voted in favor of Brexit, 67% of Asians and 73% of black voters voted against Brexit. And as an article in Jacobin magazine points out, it's an odd, quote, working class revolt that doesn't include Scotland, West Belfast, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Britain, London, most union members, most black and minority ethnic voters, and 3/4 of young voters. That is a pretty odd revolt. What it was a similar kind of revolt that you're seeing in the United States amongst a whole layer of workers, almost entirely white workers, who are voting for Trump. It was and it was very similar to that. That same Jacobin article explained the result of this. And here again, you know, we can have all the abstractions and talk about imperialism and all that we like. Let's look at the concrete reality. As a result of that vote, here's the description. An atmosphere of tension, uncertainty, and fear has descended on the country since the vote. There's a real sense that the threat of serious violence and civil unrest is simmering just under the surface, waiting to erupt. In no small part, this is because every racist, every far-right group got a major psychological boost from the Brexit result. They feel their time has come. And the BBC, we can just dismiss that as another capitalist media, I suppose. The BBC has reports that there's been a 42% increase in the 2 weeks following the Brexit vote. There was a 42% increase in reported hate crimes compared to the same period in 2015. And physical and verbal assaults, all kinds of signs. You can look at some of it right here. Talk about Polish vermin and so on. No, not every voter, and probably not the majority of voters who voted, of workers who voted in favor of Brexit or in favor of this sort of thing. But that was the result of it. It would be the same result if Trump got elected in this country. There was another result. I mentioned that it gave heart to the right-wing, the Blairites, and the British Labour Party. and they went on to the offensive. Now I've seen David write in another forum about how the Brexit revolt gave the workers a better opportunity to fight against the Tories. Well, let's look at the reality. This is a graph here of support for Labour compared to support for the Tories. That bar is where when the right wing of Labour started their offensive, which they were given heart in that by the Brexit vote. And look at what happened. You see an extreme weakening of Labour support.
The red is Labour?
I'm sorry, yes. The red is Labour, the black is Tory support. And it's a shame. It's an abdication of our responsibility. I looked through the material from the Socialist Organizer. I could not find, and it's not just, I don't want to pick on my good friend over here and comrade, but because I've seen that everywhere. I could not find a single mention of this sort of thing. Maybe it's there somewhere buried in the 12th paragraph on page 10 somewhere, but I could not find a single mention of this extremely important development, not just of Labour, but the increase in rates and tax and so on. And I've seen that elsewhere too, of the left who supports supported Brexit. Now, and then they talk about Lexit, the left exit from Labour. That reminds me of a guy I used to know, I knew, who was organized a group to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, and he reassured them all, don't worry, because I'm going to call on gravity to stop operating when we all jump. That was the chances of there being a left exit. So there's several other points that I want to make, but I don't have the time. But in conclusion, I want to say this, that opposition, if you oppose austerity, that doesn't mean you support Keynesianism. And if you oppose the austerity of the EU, that doesn't mean that you support the liberal alternative to it. So, in conclusion, I would say this, that we don't rely on the reforms in the European Union. We rely on the struggle of the working class, and of course it has to start in one country or a group of countries, but it has to also always have a systematic, conscious appeal to the wider working class. And so I think that part of the campaign against Brexit should have been and has to be a campaign for minimum wages, guarantees for jobs and so on, and a struggle throughout the European Union, and linking that up through the refugees there with Syria, Afghanistan, and so on, with the workers throughout there. In other words, a genuine international approach, not just in flowery words, but in actual concrete practice. And it's no accident, every single so-called Lexit supporter that I've seen has opposed this sort of approach. You cannot take this approach and at the same time campaign for just walking out of the European Union without even a struggle. Thank you.
After the opening statements, a discussion period was held. A key moment in that discussion period came when one person, a supporter of Brexit, equated the free movement of workers and immigrant rights with the race to the bottom. Not a single one of the panelists who supported Brexit commented or differentiated himself from that. Here are my concluding remarks.
Brothers, sisters, comrades, first of all, a couple of factual details. On this poll, the brother is mistaken about it. What this poll represents is how people intend to vote. It has nothing to do with membership. On the claim that the demand for Brexit comes from demands of Corbyn supporters, that is simply factually totally mistaken. You're seeing a tremendous radicalization, swelling of this momentum group that Corbyn has supported, and every single person that I've talked to in Britain who's involved in that will confirm over 90%, if not 100%, of the people of momentum are opposed to Brexit. He's simply factually mistaken about that. And it was very interesting that one of the supporters of Brexit likened the free movement of workers. He said, well, big movement, big deal, it's nothing but the race to the bottom. And that is exactly the position that the anti-immigrant ideas of the working class here in Britain and a lot of other countries, that is exactly their position. And it's no accident that they take that position, because if you take the national position, which is what the supporters of Brexit are taking, then you have no answer to that issue of how immigrant workers are used. Because it has to, in order to answer, you have to have an internationalist struggle. And I outlined some of it as far as your EU-wide struggle for higher minimum wage jobs, and so on. But if you don't take that, then you have to concede to the anti-immigrant ideas. And the comrade said, well, victories are won on a national basis. Well, yes, but they're also lost on a national basis. Exactly because you cannot stop the free movement of capital. So what you have to have is the free movement of the working class and workers' struggle. Now, on this question of democratizing the EU, what we're really talking about is, can you get the EU regime to function on behalf of the working class? No, no more than you can get the individual capitalist states to do that. That's not what we're talking about. And the Brexit vote was, at the very best, idea that we can get the capitalist state run by the Tories to function on behalf of the working class. On this question of why things are so rotten and there's not mass movement in the street, it has a lot to do in this country with the absolute capitulation of the union leadership. And you can talk about it in the abstract. It's another thing to organize against it in the here and now. Those are the just. In conclusion, we have to base ourselves on the actual facts, the actual situation, and not just flowery phrases, but concrete proposals and concrete idea of how the working class can move forward.